for joining me today on Maple Leafs Man Advantage. And I'm Hawkeye, and I'm going to talk about a few different things today. Leading into the 1969-70 season, it'll be a couple of deals that the Toronto Maple Leafs made after the last Stanley Cup was handed out to the Montreal Canadiens once again, as well as the 1969 NHL Amateur Draft and the Intra-League Draft, which happened on the same day as well. But first, before I get into those, that particular day there, I'm going to talk about a couple of deals that the Leafs made. Um, First was in May of 1969. The Leafs traded defenseman Brad Selwood and right winger Rene Robert to the Vancouver Canucks of the WHL for center Ron Ward. Just looking at this and knowing definitely what Rene Robert went to do in his NHL career, just looking at it, I'm just saying, hey, there's no way I would ever make this trade. But I got to take a closer look into it. I'm going to do that, share it with you, so, see what these guys did, and hey, if they should have maybe made the trade. So going to Vancouver, I've talked about these two guys already, so I'm not going to get right into what they did. But Rene Robert, he went on to play 744 NHL games from this point, scoring 284 goals. Selwood would play 162 NHL games with 7 goals. And then he did play in the WHA. There he played 431 games and had 42 goals. So quite a bit given away here in this trade. Now, coming to Toronto, we'll take a look at Ron Ward. He would go on to play 89 NHL games, scoring 2 goals with 5 assists for 7 points. He then jumped over to the WHA and got much better numbers. And certainly, I'm expecting much more important minutes on the ice as well. There, he played 359 games, scored 170 goals with 210 assists for 380 points. So he was getting more than a point a game in the WHA. It was his opening season. That was certainly his greatest. He scored 51 goals with 67 assists for 118 points when he played for the New York Raiders of the WHA. He did bounce around the league. He was there for 5 seasons. So he also played for the Los Angeles Sharks, Vancouver Blazers, Cleveland Crusaders, Calgary Cowboys, Minnesota Fighting Saints, and the Winnipeg Jets. So he played on 7 teams in just 5 years. That's quite a few teams he played with. Now, when looking at this trade, both Selwood and Robert would get traded back to Toronto for cash before their careers even start. So I'm fine with it. We'll make that trade. We're going to go for it. Uh, we'll make that trade for sure. And then the other trade was on May the 14th, 1969. The Leafs traded Forbes Kennedy to the Pittsburgh Penguins for cash. The Leafs had grabbed Forbes late in the previous season for a playoff push. They needed to put some toughness in their lineup, and they were hoping that he would provide that for them in the playoffs. Unfortunately, they did get swept by the Boston Bruins, but Kennedy never did play another NHL game, so I'm fine with this transaction. It's okay with me to make that trade as well. So then we're going to jump to June the 11th, 1969, and this will be we'll start with the NHL Amateur Draft, and it was conducted at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, um, regular stomping grounds for the NHL Draft at the time. So the first overall pick went to the Montreal Canadiens. I had talked about, I believe, in the last video I did about the 1968 draft. Montreal was allowed to draft two French Canadian players before their own selection. Sweetheart deal for Montreal. Wow. Yeah, like I'm not gonna say, hey, that's why they won all the cups and like the only reason, but man, oh man, they took advantage of that for sure and made some great selections with those picks. So they had the first overall pick, and that ended up being Réjean Houle. He went on to win 5 cups in Montreal, and he played 11 seasons there. He then jumped over to the WHA for a few seasons, playing for the Quebec Nordique, and then jumped back to the NHL, played for Montreal again. Um, in the NHL, he played 634 games, scoring 161 goals with 247 assists for 408 points. He scored 30 goals in 1977-78 for Montreal. That was the only NHL team he ended up was ever played for in the NHL. In the WHL, it was the Nordique, the only team he played for there. He played 214 games, scoring 118 goals, adding 139 assists for 257 points. So he as well, like Ron Ward, he was getting more than a point a game in the WHA. In 1975-76, he scored 51 goals with 52 assists for 103 points in that league. So he went first overall. Now, looking at the Leafs in this draft, they're going to pick at number 9. Um, and this would be their new GM, Jim Gregory. This is his first draft. So this is his very first draft pick right in the 1969 draft. Uh, they ended up picking right winger Ernie Moser, born on April the 30th, 1949, in Mendham, Saskatchewan. He had played 2 seasons in the WCHL for the Estevan Bruins. He played 115 games, scoring 72 goals with 75 assists for 147 points. Ernie showed some real promise playing there in his last season. He ended up scoring 46 goals for them. Unfortunately, though, Ernie never did end up playing one game in the NHL. So that's too bad. Now, looking at who they could have drafted, they could have drafted centerman, sorry, Ivan Boldriev. He was drafted by the Boston Bruins at pick number 11. His best years, when looking this up, he was certainly before my time. I think I got a hockey card of his um, somewhere. I swear I do. But his best years may have been with the Chicago Blackhawks. He ended up playing 1,052 games in the NHL, scoring 361 goals with 505 assists for 866 points over the course of a 15-year career. Nice long career there. He ended up also playing in the 1978 All-Star game. He ended up scoring 35 goals. That was his career high, but he did it 3 times during his career. So he also played for the Atlanta Flames, Vancouver Canucks, and the Detroit Red Wings as well. So that's who Toronto maybe should have drafted with that number 1 pick. In the second round, the Leafs chose forward Doug Brindley. He was born not far down the road from here and was from Walkerton, Ontario. He was born on June the 8th, 1949. Doug had played 2 seasons in the WHA for the Niagara Falls Flyers. There he played 108 games, scoring 55 goals with 65 assists for 120 points. Pretty darn good. He showed real promise in his final season as he scored 40 goals for the Flyers. Doug didn't have really much of a career. He did go on to play 3 games in the NHL for the Leafs. That was it. Doug, though, then he did jump over the WHA and played for the Cleveland Crusaders from 1972 through 74. He played 103 goals, or scored, he played 103 games. He scored 28 goals with 20 assists for 48 points. And in the net for the Crusaders was former Leaf Jerry Cheevers as well. So there you have it. They would have had a pretty darn good goalie in their net. Now, with this selection, we're going to look elsewhere as well. The player I kind of zeroed in on here and what it chose is I would have gone with left winger belting Bert Wilson. He was selected by the New York Rangers at pick number 23. He went on to play 478 NHL games, scoring 37 goals with 44 assists for 81 points. But it was his aggression that is what Wilson was known for, and get into the odd tussle. As he had also had 646 PIMs during his career as well. So, other than the Rangers, he also played for the St. Louis Blues, LA Kings, and the Calgary Flames. So, in the third round, the Leafs ended up selecting a defenseman in Larry McIntyre with the number 31 pick. Born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan on July the 13th, 1949, he ended up playing 41 games in the NHL, and he grabbed 3 assists along the way. There was a pick around Larry that may have ended up being a better selection, and that was center Bobby Sheehan. He was selected with the following pick, number 32, by the Montreal Canadiens. He lit it up in the OHL, by the way, or the OHA at that time, playing for the St. Catharines Blackhawks. He scored 44 goals in just 44 games. He was scoring a goal a game. Pretty awesome stuff there. He ended up playing 310 NHL games with 48 goals, 63 assists for 111 points. He did score 20 goals in 1971-72 when he played for the California Golden Seals. He also played for the Chicago Blackhawks, Colorado Rockies, and the LA Kings. He also won the Stanley Cup with the Habs in 1971 as well. But he jumped over to the WHA. A lot of players did that back then. And he played 241 games in that league. He scored 75 goals with 110 assists for 185 points. He ended up scoring 35 goals for the New York Raiders. So also in the WHA, he played for the New York Golden Blades slash Jersey Knights. I guess they moved during that year and then were renamed and everything. The Edmonton Oilers and the Indianapolis Racers as well. So that would be the selection I would choose in the third round there. So in the fourth round now, the Leafs chose forward Frank Hughes. He was born on October the 1st, 1949 in Fernie, BC. He had played one season in the WCHL for the Edmonton Oil Kings. He played 50 games there, scoring 18 goals with 10 assists for 40 or 28 points, mind you. He ended up just playing 5 games in the NHL. It was for the California Golden Seals. There was no one. There was a player, I forget who it was, who played a little bit more than Frank, but whatever. I'll just say Frank's the right choice. There was nobody around him that really went on to a much better career, I would say. So we'll stick with that in the fourth round. Now in the fifth round, this is definitely a good thing with this draft. There are more selections. There was 5 rounds in this draft. Some of the drafts, some teams, if I remember correctly, didn't even make a choice, and some only had one, and sometimes there was only 3 rounds, and sometimes there was two, I believe. Um, but in the fifth round, the Leafs had the number 55 pick, and they chose left winger Brian Spencer. He was born on September the 3rd, 1949, in Fort St. James, BC. He went on to play 553 games in the NHL. He scored 80 goals with 143 assists for 223 points. He also wasn't afraid of the penalty box, and Spencer had 634 penalty minutes as well over a 10-year career. So he Kirk had a good NHL career there as well. And then, other than the Leafs, he also played for the New York Islanders, Buffalo Sabres, and the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. Um, and we are in the sixth round now. I thought there was only 5. Nope, there's a sixth round. They In the sixth round, the Leafs ended up selecting another defenseman, and they went with Bob Newfield. He was born in Souris, Manitoba. Unfortunately, Bob never did end up playing an NHL game at all. Um, so we're going to look elsewhere. And the Leafs could have selected a player around where Newfield was drafted, and that was Dave Hudson. He was a centerman. He ended up playing 409 games in the NHL with 59 goals, 124 assists for 183 points. He played for the New York Islanders, Kansas City Scouts, and the Colorado Rockies as well. So, what I'll say there's your six players that the Leafs ended up drafting. I would say Jim Gregory's first draft was a bit of a slow ground out, if you will, to compare it to another sport, baseball, that I love. Um, but I don't hold individual drafts against general managers unless it becomes a pattern, unless they really can't draft anybody. There's a problem there in looking for talent. I know Jim Gregory, he's going to hit some home runs here. But in his first draft, it wasn't, so excellent. But it's also only one part of their job. That's not the only thing they do is do drafts. Um, there's other things like grades, free agent signings, which at this time is certainly not as big as it is today, or perhaps maybe when the 80s roll around, that becomes a much more integral part of being a general manager. Re-signing talent you have, bringing the right coaching staff, knowing the heartbeat of your team and listening to your players and everything. Those are just other parts of the job too, and that's not everything. I'll never know everything to do with a general manager. I've never done that job, but there you have it. So I'm going to jump over into now the intra-league draft, which was held on the same day, June 11th, 1969. And the Leafs lost a couple players, but they gained another player as well. They lost goaltender Al Smith to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He would go on to play 221 more NHL games, win 71 games, tie 35 of them back when you could have ties. He also had 10 shutouts and an 882 save percentage as well for the rest of his career. I think he had played maybe 10 games in Toronto so far in his career, but with the goaltenders they had in Toronto, he couldn't seem to get much playing time in Toronto. Um, they also, he also played in the WHA as well for 5 seasons. He was getting much more playing time over there. He played 260 games. He won 141 of them, tying 15. He had 10 shutouts over there and a 325 goals against average in the WHA. And he also ended up winning the Avco Cup in 1972-73 with the New England Whalers. The Leafs also lost right winger Larry Mickey to the Montreal Canadiens. After the previous season, he was really putting his first big NHL season in with the Leafs the previous season. He'd go on to play another 217 games, scoring 31 goals with 32 assists for 63 points. Now, the Leafs were able to grab goalie Marv Edwards from the Pittsburgh Penguins, who they lost Al Smith to. So Edwards would play some good minutes for the Leafs this season as he'd play 25 games. That's pretty good. I would definitely think of like this as the Leafs trading Al Smith for Marv Edwards. That's one way you could think of it. Um, Edwards had only played one game in the NHL with Pittsburgh, but he would go on to play 60 more games, winning 15, tying 7 of them. He'd grab a couple shutouts and have an 893 save percentage. So there you have it. A few things to go over in this video, but there you go. With the 1969 NHL Draft is kind of the big part of this video. And at the end of it, I'll definitely put in here the picks that I would have if I were the general manager or making the picks during this draft, and see what team that I can build from the start here as Jim Gregory is now the general manager.